right, gang, welcome to the podcast. So this week, Dave actually sent us a podcast from the Huberman Lab that Kate and I have been listening to. I'm not quite all the way through it, but it brought up some really cool, I think, just thoughts on how we structure our identities as just people in general. And it can relate a lot to workout and training and you know, how to evolve our identities and how we see ourselves. And having an identity is not necessarily a bad thing, but there's healthy ways and then not so healthy ways, I think, to, evolve that identity. And, I've gone through periods of time where I've struggled with that. And the girl in the podcast, I haven't gotten to, I don't know if she goes into more detail, but she was the Juilliard school.
And she was like a really young violin player, excelled at when she was really young.
Yeah. And she got injured, and her finger wouldn't work the right way. And it basically ended her career, and she had to, refine purpose in other things. And I think we'll all go through that in a ton of different ways, whether it's, athletically, career-wise. Our identities change if, once we get married, once we become parents, there's tons of different ways that happens. What were some of your thoughts on listening to that, and maybe even how your identity has changed and evolved over the last, 20, 25 years?
Well, I guess my thoughts on the podcast at first, it really struck me as, I think, important for, like, if a message that we're trying to send out for people not to get too attached to, like, I see, like, maybe like I'm a runner, or I'm a CrossFitter, or I do this, or I only do this one sort of activity that I'm good at. And if you can kind of just think, like the woman in the podcast is talking about, like thinking about your why and why she played music. And it was to, like, kind of have a community with others and share, like, love of music, and just more like be around others in that community. And if you can kind of find your why with, like, staying active, you never have to lose that. And I feel like I've done a good job of that. And I was talking to Dave a little bit about it. And it's kind of funny, but I always participated in, like, a wide variety of sports. I never really excelled at any of them. So it's been kind of easy for me, because I never thought of myself like, you have to be first, you have to be the best. So I was always okay, like, kind of being in, like, the upper middle, wherever, like, so if I'm running a 5K, I kind of want to do pretty good for my age group. But like, I don't have to be the best. And that doesn't bother me. Or I remember, you remember when we did a competition together and we both got second place, and I was fine. I was like, hey, this kind of feels normal to me.
For me, it was the end of the world. I was like,
and I was like, no, I'm the best loser ever.
Chelsea will still bring that up now and again, just to, like, rib me a little bit.
Well, it's kind of funny, because the only thing we would win is literally, like, some protein powder.
For me, it was just the principle. Like, I was always so hard on myself with everything. Like, especially at that age, like, kind of being in that space where I'm
really glad the grand prize wasn't something spectacular,
like $5,000 or a trip to, like, Hawaii.
Yeah,
or something.
I mean, they got flown out. So they're talking about it was Lifetime Fitness. Kate was working there, had a basically like a CrossFit Games, like this Alpha Games, and Kate and Dave won the qualifier in Columbus pretty easily, and then went out, and they were, like, in the first wave. Only maybe they were sending people through as, like, a cannonball run style workout. They were in one of the first or second waves of people that got sent out, and they each set times that were not, and no one was even coming close. I mean, they blew everyone out of the water by minutes, and it looked like it was in the bag. And then, like, people had a time to shoot for. So that was where it was like, it wasn't like Dave was going head to head against the guy that beat him.
Yeah, it's not like a race where it's like we got to keep up with each other like this. Yeah, like kind of how most competitions go. You're just kind of individually going, and then if you don't have a chance to really beat someone because you don't have any score to follow. Yeah, it's fine. I'm not complaining. It's not a big deal. So I'm not like
let's find the person.
What was tough to swallow? I think it was the last 2 people. I mean, and 50 people probably went through this thing. And, 50 guys, 50 girls. I mean, it was like
an obstacle course.
Yes.
Like a 10 or 15 minute obstacle course, a bunch of things you had to get through. And drag dummies, do burpees, do lifts.
And this guy...
you had to do thrusters where your knees hit your
that was the standard. It wasn't a full squat overhead. It was like
elbows
you could literally do a deadlift, like a front rack deadlift, touch your knees, your elbows. We're in the middle of it, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm doing a thruster.
Like a really pretty thruster, and they no-repped him, and they're like, touch your knees to your elbows, and he's like, okay.
What?
Do you understand CrossFit?
People didn't have front rack positions at Lifetime, so they made their standard a knee touching like a thigh or something.
Basically, the thing you never want to do unless you want to break your wrist.
Yeah. So anyway. the guy edges Dave out, and he has like he was a monster, but he had less than what I would say optimal technique, and they were just kind of giving him reps, and he came in like tumbling over the finish line, like selling out, and David kind of cruised. He had minutes ahead, so it kind of burnt him, I think, at the end there, just to give background on it. But Kate is right. Like the way they identified themselves, Dave was a really high level, regional CrossFit athlete. And then, Kate wasn't taking it as seriously, and you got to see a little bit of like the difference in how they were handling that at the end.
Which kind of brings up a good point. I think when she was saying, that it's nice. It's okay to have success, especially early in life. It gives you confidence. But the downside of that is you attach too much of yourself to the things you're really good at when you're young. And then eventually maybe, if you're an early bloomer, if you have success, eventually sometimes people catch up to you. And that could be a really hard thing when you start to find yourself not necessarily, in the lead anymore. It's not so easy for you. So I think in certain things like sports and athletics, I probably had, early success with it. So I saw myself as like, if I'm not the best, like that's a real problem for me.
Yeah.
And it's over time, it got better, but I just was, it wasn't just sports, just internally, I had this feeling of like just really hard on myself that like your best is not good enough type of thing. So that's really kind of how that was manifesting in certain things like that's the stupid event we did. Yeah.
But, and that's probably what made you so successful and what made you a really good athlete. But it's just interesting because I'm thinking about like myself as I was growing up, and it's always a debate in my household with my parents. They think that I was this great athlete, like I was really good at softball and really good at this. I'm like, no, I wasn't. But I never wanted that pressure. So when I started to get good, it would almost be like I would mind fuck myself. Like I was a pitcher, and I was really, really good when I was a freshman for about half a season. Then it just felt too overwhelming. And I just started throwing the craziest pitches you've ever seen, like almost over the freaking fence. It was horrible. Like, I mean, I would last maybe
a little bit.
An inning every time. And then they would just take me out. And I really just think it was part of me. I don't like all that pressure. Like I even like, we were talking the other day about like owning a gym or having, like, I would have never bought this building. It freaks me out. I don't like having that much pressure. I would have like a small little studio, but I like feeling really comfortable and then maybe surprising people. Like, hey, maybe I can do this. Like anytime I got decent running half marathons. So my best time was like, I had like 7:09 miles. Not anything like that would make me place, but it's good for a normal person. And I would always say, okay, I just want to run like faster than a 9-minute mile. And I love that. And then I would just kind of get into this flow and I'd feel really good. And I probably could have been a better runner. And I remember one of my clients, he was a former professional runner, and he still coached his wife, who was a professional runner at the time. He'd always try to work with me, and I just wasn't willing to push that hard because it would suck the fun out of it. Like when I had that much pressure. And so, I mean, I think a lot of it's just how you're wired. If that like lights you up and that makes you happy and gets you excited, you kind of follow that. But if you're kind of just like, oh, I don't like that, in the end, it doesn't really matter unless you're a professional athlete. And I mean, what percent of the, population are professional athletes? So I just think you got to kind of find what makes you happy. And sometimes you might struggle with that. And I mean, I guess to that same point, as I got older, I started like trying to get myself to do different events. And I remember, in my 20s, dating different guys. I had a guy, I think they were always probably annoyed by it because I'm always like doing a fitness show where I'm running a half marathon, I'm doing a triathlon. And one guy would like really like just burn his ass. He's like, can you just like for 6 months not do something? And I'm like, yeah, I can. He's like, let's see it. And I remember I didn't. And at that point, I was just like, I don't even know it made me depressed. And I'm like, is this a problem with me? And I think, it's all subjective. If it makes you happy, then it's not a problem. If you're like crawling in your skin because of what you're pushing yourself to do, then it's a problem. But at every point, if you're like stretching yourself, to be better, you're going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be a point where it's not fun. Like on the 25th mile of a marathon, I've not ever run a full marathon, but I'm sure it's not fun. I'm sure you're like, I wanted to be done at 10 miles ago, but it's interesting.
I think some of it comes down to, intrinsic and extrinsic goals. And I think you need a combination of both. But I think what most people really need more of is the intrinsic goals. So things that light you up and make you feel good. And you're doing it for, we'll talk a little bit about like habit-based goals rather than, performance-based goals. So an extrinsic goal is like, I want to win the medal, and if I win the medal, it's at all costs. Or, that intrinsic goal is like, I really like the crew that I'm training with, and this is super fun.
So it's like an outcome.
Yeah, an outcome-driven goal rather than like the process-driven goal. And the more I think we can fall in love with the process of things, those outcomes, they sort of come.
Yeah,
they come to you easier than when you're like, my goal is this at all costs, no matter what. And then when you I know that is something that really messes with me is I'll take a little injury or my schedule or something screws up in some way that makes that goal. And
losing that one yoga class that you used to do every week when they changed their schedule. That really fucked with you.
Yeah. Well, so to that point, it's just like when you have like a certain outcome that you're looking for and you're married to that all of the time, it makes the process not quite as fun rather than like, I really like this. I'd love to try and compete, see how it goes this year. So whether it's a competition or anything, falling in love with that process, and it's good to have goals. But I think you have to fall in love with what you're doing more than the outcome, because even if you achieve that outcome,
it doesn't last long.
No, a day or two.
I mean, even a couple of years or whatever. Yeah, if you're purely motivated by the outcome of this thing, at some point you're going to burn out because you just hate what you're doing.
Yep.
Right? If you enjoy the process, like the outcome almost doesn't even matter sometimes, or it eventually sometimes takes care of itself a little bit. But I've definitely noticed that. With me, just whether it's, being in a lot of creative stuff, if I often find myself, I've made works that I like, but I'm like, I just didn't enjoy doing it. It just feel like it just was work every time. And I'm like, this shouldn't be work. Right.
Yeah.
And I've had pieces that I've really liked, but I was like, oh, I really enjoyed the process and just actually being there and present doing it. So it's tough. I mean, I think it's always just kind of the sliding scale. And sometimes you have to sometimes take a look at like, why am I doing this? What, for the right reasons. Like you said before, I just, you're in your 20s always finding something to do, and someone made a bet with you that you couldn't. And like, not that there's anything wrong with that, trying different things and exploring stuff, but it's like, what's your why? Like, the joke is like, what are you running from? Am I running from? Right. Yeah. I think everyone has that a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's just about kind of maybe understanding that and being okay with that, or, just taking a look down inside and just being like, why am I doing this stuff? Do I just like exploring stuff, or am I just like afraid to like look at my inner self, whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and I think, and I really think that's probably what I was doing at the time. And I think I just was not, I was like 10 years away from being ready to look at myself. And I mean, I had to be close to like 40 before I was really willing to do that.
All of us here probably to some extent. Yeah. And I think sometimes you just can't escape that. Like, so
you just kind of have to be sick of yourself, I think.
Like, you're like, I'm tired of going through this stuff. I'm tired of, my habits and mental thought patterns have worked, we always talk about things that if people kind of in their late 20s, 30s, they start to get a little older, have some life experiences, maybe hit a rough spot. And I think you start to do a lot of self-examination. There's always these things like, well, we develop these tools and strategies when they're young, whether we want to or we do, and they work for a while until they start to really eat you alive. Right? They make you a successful person. They make you a lot of money. They make you a great athlete. But like eventually that just starts turning inside you when maybe it just catches up with you, or it starts to ruin the lives of people around you, or it starts to, maybe the thing that it helped you in before as an athlete and you're not that thing anymore. It just doesn't, it just starts like a cancer inside you. So just really like, what's my motivation? What's my why? And just trying to approach that a little from that angle a little bit more.
That's good.
I've been like self-examining on some of my like thought patterns and processes. Like I had a big chip on my shoulder. Like I had been really good at sports and really poor academically as a kid. And I got some eye-hand coordination and did well in some sports. And I kind of made that identity for myself as a kid. But then I was a really late bloomer. Everyone caught up and then went far surpassed me. And it kind of flipped my world upside down in high school for a while. And it was really disconcerting. And I had this huge chip on my shoulder. I grew, senior year, freshman year of college, and I kind of got that back. And then in college, I played baseball and boxing, and I started getting sports back again and got it with CrossFit. And, but a lot of it was through like this, I needed to prove something to myself. So I was like, I need to go take on these challenges, or I need to try and qualify. I always thought I was like this huge underdog. And then
proving something seems to be a common thread with a lot of this stuff. It's whether to other people or to yourself or to like your God or whatever. Yes. There's like, there's some feeling of I'm not good enough. Like,
and I think it's always proving it ultimately to yourself, even if you're doing it for other people. Yeah. Because to me, like when I have whatever I have issues with and trying to prove, it's never enough. So I never get enough validation from other people. It's never enough.
Yep.
And it like, then I notice, okay, you're just going to torture yourself because whatever you're looking for, it's never going to be enough from other people because you're trying to prove it to yourself.
Yeah, where I was,
you don't believe it.
I was like,
the finish line is just going to keep moving.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
because now as I've got to 40 years old, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, that's all done. We're in a different place in life, but these thought patterns and feelings are really hardwired into me still. So they just keep popping up. And I'm like, okay, we need to be able to shift that identity a little bit and, again, fall back in love with the process of what it is we're doing, fall in love with the process of building the gym and training and doing all that for the love of doing it more than, I'm going to achieve any sort of accolade at this point. We have so many more things going on in our lives that having this narrow focus doesn't serve probably all three of us in any great way, especially in an athletic endeavor. And it's like, we just have to fall in love with the process of training, working, living our lives, things like that. And I'm trying to wrap my head around that and do, journaling and work and things to find purpose in that, now. And it's been a year of kind of self-reflection where last year I got back on a kick of being an athlete again and got really into it. And that was I had an amazing time doing that, but I don't do well with transitions. in and out of that. And it was time to transition out of that. Like, okay, other things are popping up and my body's telling me like pump the brakes a little bit. And so, yeah. And I'm just working through that. That's what my kind of thing is this year, is like, I'm trying to find a nice groove again.
As it pertains to the gym, sometimes like someone, I've heard this a lot over the years, and every time someone says it, just kind of, and then I listened to this conversation they had on Huberman's podcast the other day, and it just, I was like, oh, that's kind of relates to maybe think of what this individual had said in class the other day. It was something to the effect of like, they were saying, I'm just not very good at CrossFit, or I can't do this stuff very well. And I was like, who cares?
Yeah.
You don't need to stop like making yourself feel bad because you feel like you haven't reached a certain competency level to stuff.
Sure.
You're here being healthy, working out, moving. You haven't maybe gotten some things yet that you want, but like, what do you want to be? Like, I was like, just stop beating yourself up. You don't have to be good at CrossFit. You're just doing fitness and being healthy. Like, just, this is the fun part of like, don't be, so you don't have to be a certain thing here or at any gym.
Yeah.
Just keep moving.
And that's a really good point. And I think, just something I'm finding this year for some reason, I've gotten really slow as a runner, and I've always considered myself a good runner. And it's almost kind of like comical how slow. Like I went out for a run and I think I did 3 miles in 29 minutes. And Oscar, my son, was beside me, like riding his bike. And he said, Mom, is this a jog? I was like, yeah. We got done. And I was tired that day, and it would have been like a good run anyways. But normally, like if I'm running even tired, it's like I'm running like 8-15 miles and I'm not like dying. I'm like running slow on purpose. And, just to that point, like that story reminded me of it, because I thought, I still enjoy running. Do I need to be embarrassed because I'm slow? A lot of people are just like, yeah, I run 9-minute miles. They're fine with it. Like, who gives a shit? Like, why can't, maybe it's just time for me to enjoy running and try to be fast. And I just like, look at the birds a little bit while I run and, take in the scenery and just enjoy it. And I think, like to address what you were saying earlier, like the transitions are hard because I think you kind of get out of like your why. So if you're always focusing on an outcome, then transitions are going to be hard. And like, so you like to like see things out. You like nice, clean, like cycles or something. Like I'm going to do this for 3 months. Yeah. I'm going to do this. And I have these, like everything has to be clean and wrapped up, but that's really just like not life.
Sure.
Like you never dated a girl and said, okay, well, I'm going to date her for 3 months. That's a nice, like small cycle of a date where, you don't really have to be serious. And then we move on when we start talking about like meeting parents and stuff, or the first fight or whatever, Yep. Like that's just life is messier than that. And I think if you can always follow like what is fun, like just keep it lighter. And I think the three of us can be light, but just knowing like I can tend to be just a more like serious, like driven person. And I always liked that part of me. That was a lot of my identity when I was young, and it made me successful. I was like just the youngest trainer they hired when I was working at Lifetime. And I like surprising people because they, I just thought I would do shit and leave. And then I started doing well, and I'm like, okay, well, I can do this, and I can be tough, and I can be just like a real badass. And then at a certain point, like that's a lot of energy, and that's a lot of working, because I am that, but I am just kind of like silly, goofy, and carefree. And I really miss that part of me. And I'm trying to come back to that now. But can you still be successful and still be like silly and goofy? Like you don't need to be serious all the time. And I have a lot of fun doing that. And I think just being able to kind of change your identity, but it's really not ever really changing your identity. It's changing how you basically put value to yourself. So if it's not just like being successful as an athlete or successful in your career, if it's also just being a really good friend or enjoying your life. I mean, really, when we're little, we think about success as being happy, right? And enjoying your life. And whenever something isn't serving you, you kind of know because it's not fun anymore. And then if you can just switch gears when it's not fun, like, hey, I had a couple bad workouts, but more than anything, that just wasn't fun for me to go through. And I was kind of like not looking forward to the workout, and then the workout wasn't enjoyable. it's maybe time to switch gears,
Yeah.
Something that when I was just doing the day I sent you guys that conversation, I was just doing some cleaning around the house at a podcast and I was listening to it, and just right off the bat, she was saying something about like, it's just interesting how, and I think this is kind of a modern Western society, definitely United States kind of phenomenon where even from a young age with kids, like just innocently enough, we go, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up? Not who do you want to be when you grow up, right? There's this immediate sense that I must perform, I must achieve these tasks or these goals, or I must perform a function to have value or be a person in the world. Right. And yeah, that's part of being a human, but like, I think we get kind of indoctrinated into, I must be a thing in order to be a person to have the right to exist in this world, right?
That's very much like U.S. culture.
Yeah. I mean, believe me, that has led to some great innovation and production. It's kind of like, but it's a double-edged sword. Like at sometimes just being able to sit quiet with your thoughts, or just feeling like I have a right to exist in this world without having to like be this high performer, like I'm this, I'm that. We all wear different hats, but at the end of the day, that's not really who you are. And probably most countries around the world where that's not a huge part of it, they're not like, they would be kind of baffled by the things that we care about here. Or like, it's just, but it's just a certain, you can't avoid it here living in this country, just that kind of innate pressure to like hustle and grind, and you've got to do this and be successful, or you're kind of missing out in this capitalist game. It's you have to kind of play it a little bit if you want to survive, but again, you sink too much into that to what you do, it tends to eat you alive after a while, especially if you don't end up being a winner at that.
Right.
So I think that kind of definitely, I was like, listen, I was like, oh shit. It kind of like really kind of floored me a little bit as I kind of thought it was kind of a kind of a simple premise, but I was like, that's so spot on.
No, that's true.
I can always think of anything you're doing is if it's almost gamified and you get into, I always like to think about flow and different times when I found that, and whether it was like sports or CrossFit or anything, I can always think of like the best times that it was, and it was the best baseball. Baseball was my thing as a kid that I ever played, and the most fun I had was we had 2 summers where we had a big neighborhood of about 10 to 12 kids that would get together, and we'd play like anywhere from like 4-on-4 to 6-on-6 modified ruled baseball with a variety of ages of kids. It was like that Sandlot movie. And we did that all summer. And I don't think I've ever been better at baseball comparatively to like my age than that time. And I don't think I've ever had more fun playing a sport. We just play until it got dark, diving all over the place, just having a ton of fun. And then I remember playing in high school when it was just super serious, and like every at bat, like I'm battling to like, if I don't get a hit here, I'm going to sit the bench for 3 games. And I'm like, it wasn't even fun. I'm like, this sucks. And I wasn't good. And it just wasn't like, it wasn't a good time. And I can think of that in, when it comes to business or any sport, or even socially, when you're just in this groove with like a group of friends and you're going out, and I think it's always just trying to, keep trying things until you can find that groove and stay in that kind of juicy flow, and it comes and goes. It's not, you can't stay there.
I think forever, we always want to try to recreate something too. Yeah. Like, hey, this was good. And they talk about that in the podcast too. Like, there's some sort of experiment with like uncertainty. Like, there was this group that was told that they would be shocked. And then they kind of measured their like anxiety levels or through their brain waves or something. And then one group that they told there was a 50% chance that they would be shocked. And that group was a lot more anxious than the group that knew for sure they were going to be shocked, because they like mentally prepared themselves. Like, okay, I just, I'm going to go through this.
Uncertainty is like, it's crippling. It's hard.
Yeah. But if you could kind of look at life like an adventure, like a little kid, I don't feel like it's almost like it has to be tied to some sort of outcome or how we're viewed by other people. It has to be, I feel like little kids don't have that as much. Maybe some, like I think our son has like some anxiety over like, he's not sure about certain things. but like even before that hits, like when they're really little, they're just like, oh, let's go try this and let's go try that. And then if you know you enjoy something and you're always trying to recreate that, that doesn't work ever. And I always hear that with clients, like, oh, I was in a good groove here, unless they just did not feel well. Like there's all, like, hey, I went through this really hard time and I was really lean and felt ripped, but I like just had gotten a divorce and I was super sad, or a parent died, or, and it was all these circumstances and I wasn't well, did not feel well, but my body looked great, then they won't try to recreate that. But otherwise, I think we attach, like, even I'll have people that were like, okay, when I felt good, I was eating chicken and broccoli and rice every day for lunch. I'm like, that there's nothing magical about that, right? Like maybe you have macros that felt good or whatever. Not even that. It's just you're trying to recreate something that can never be recreated because your body's different, your mindset's different, all the stresses like in your life are different. And I don't think that's what you're meant to do. I don't think you're meant to have the same experience over and over. I think you're meant to go out and explore and even explore like internally what makes you happy and allowing that to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Being curious, I think is something that comes up a lot too. And in anything. And I think with exercise, if we can bring it back to what most people are listening to this is being curious with different movements, different types of exercise, CrossFit really checks the box on a ton of that. But, I think it comes down to like, not skipping. If you have an injury, of course, you want to stay away from it, but not skipping a move that obviously is just going to put you in a little bit of an uncomfortable position. You'll find really quickly that those are the days you always remember, the most fun. The workouts that keep you in a bit of a flow state because you're learning and progressing in a new way, and it's fun. And I always think back to, that's what those early days of doing CrossFit, what was so fun about it was every couple days it was this new thing. I'm going to learn how to climb a rope, or, these Olympic lifts are really hard and I'm going to like try and learn how to do these, or I'm jumping on this super high box and, learning all that stuff. So, if you're listening to this and wanting to relate it to CrossFit class, like start going to the skills class on Sundays or the Olympic weightlifting on Thursdays, and don't skip the days where we have, L-sits and rope climbs and handstand holds. Like get in there and try it. Yeah. Those are the days that make, that really make CrossFit special. And, I think that if we can get into that and that play, and I really try and plan our workouts, to fit that in and not just be super robotic. Like we're always on this like progressive plan to get us, 10 places higher in next year's open. Play, have fun, and that's going to keep you engaged for a long time. And when it comes to CrossFit, like I really, when you're in a good groove, I don't feel like there is anything almost that feels better physically than like a really good CrossFit shape where you feel like you can run and your like shoulders are strong and you can squat and no physical task scares you and you walk around with your head held high. But a lot of that comes from trying those new things.
Yeah. Try, like I said, don't skip days where there's certain things you may not be good at. I mean, a lot of times people come in and they have a certain background, a runner, a lifter, or even over time, there's things they naturally excel at more than others. But just, with physical activities and exercise, try things you aren't as good at.
Yeah.
Round yourself a little bit more and be okay with the process of trying to get really good at something you're terrible at first. I mean, it's a good mental exercise and patience and, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, guys, you have anything to add? Good spot to end. All right, guys, we will be taking a week off next week, and then we'll be back the following week. Mike is getting married, so we'll see you soon.